The September rains had been falling for 6 days straight when Marcus Kane first heard the distant roar that would change everything. It started as a whisper on the wind, barely audible over the drumming of water on his cabin roof, but grew steadily stronger until it sounded like a freight train bearing down on the Arizona territory. Marcus stepped out onto his covered porch, his weathered boots splashing in the puddles that had formed despite the overhang. At 45, he had lived through enough desert storms to know when something was different, when the usual autumn rains had turned into something more dangerous. The sound was coming from the north, from the direction of the Mogollon Rim, where the seasonal streams fed into the Verde River. His ranch sat on a rise overlooking the valley, far enough from the river to be safe from normal flooding, but close enough to water his cattle during dry spells. It was good land, productive land, but it was also lonely land. Marcus had been alone here for 3 years, ever since consumption took his wife Sarah and left him with nothing but work and silence. The roar grew louder, and Marcus grabbed his field glasses from the hook beside the door. Through the rain and mist, he could see something that made his blood run cold. A wall of brown water was rushing down the valley, carrying with it everything that had once stood in its path. Trees as thick as a man's waist spun like twigs in the current, and the debris of human habitation tumbled along with them. Marcus knew there was an Apache settlement upstream, a small band that had lived peacefully in the valley for as long as he could remember. They traded occasionally with the few white ranchers in the area, bringing baskets and pottery in exchange for tools and sometimes food during harsh winters. Marcus had always maintained cordial relations with them, understanding that they were as much a part of this land as the saguaro cactus and the red rock formations. Now their village was gone, swept away by the merciless flood that continued to rage through the valley like a living thing bent on destruction. For 2 days, Marcus watched the waters surge and retreat, leaving behind a landscape transformed beyond recognition. Where once there had been a gentle river meandering between cottonwoods, now there was a wide channel carved deep into the earth, littered with the remnants of everything the flood had consumed. On the 3rd morning, when the rain finally stopped, and weak sunlight began to pierce the clouds, Marcus saddled his horse and rode down to survey the damage. The devastation was complete. His lower pastures were buried under 3 feet of mud and debris, his watering holes filled with silt, his fences twisted into unrecognizable tangles of wire and wood. But it was what he found near the old river bend that stopped him cold. A girl sat on a boulder in the middle of the muddy wasteland, her legs drawn up to her chest, her long black hair hanging like a curtain around her face. She was Apache, maybe 16 or 17 years old, wearing a traditional dress that had once been white, but was now stained brown with mud and water. She sat perfectly still, staring at nothing, and for a moment, Marcus wondered if she was even alive. He dismounted and approached slowly, his boots squelching in the soft mud. When he was close enough to speak without shouting, he cleared his throat gently. "Miss," he said, keeping his voice soft and non-threatening. "Are you hurt?" The girl looked up at him with eyes that seemed far older than her years. They were dark brown, almost black, and filled with an emptiness that Marcus recognized. He had seen the same look in his own mirror after Sarah died, the look of someone who had lost everything that mattered. She did not speak, but she shook her head slightly, indicating that she was not physically injured. Marcus looked around at the muddy expanse where her village had once stood. There was nothing left. Not even the foundation stones of the dwellings. The flood had scoured the area clean, leaving only smooth mud and scattered debris. "Was this your home?" he asked gently. This time she nodded, a single tear cutting a clean track through the mud on her cheek. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He had seen death and loss before, had buried his share of friends and family, but there was something particularly devastating about this young woman's solitude. She was the sole survivor of a catastrophe that had wiped out her entire world. "Do you have anywhere to go?" he asked. "Family in other places?" She shook her head again, and Marcus saw her shoulders begin to shake with suppressed sobs. For a long moment, Marcus stood in the mud, rain dripping from his hat brim, studying this girl who had lost everything. He was not a man given to impulsive decisions, but something about her situation called to a part of him that he thought had died with Sarah. Perhaps it was recognition, the kinship of shared loss. Or perhaps it was simply the basic human need to help someone in desperate straits. "I have a ranch up on the ridge," he said quietly. "It is not much, but it is dry and warm, and there is always food. You are welcome to stay as long as you need." The girl looked up at him, studying his face as if trying to determine whether this white man could be trusted. Marcus waited patiently, understanding that trust was not something that could be rushed, especially for someone who had just lost everything she had ever known. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why?" It was a simple question, but Marcus knew it carried the weight of everything she had experienced. Why would a white rancher offer shelter to an Apache girl? Why would he show kindness to someone from a people his own kind often viewed as enemies? Why would he risk the disapproval of his neighbors, the potential complications of such an arrangement? Marcus removed his hat and ran his fingers through his graying hair, considering his answer carefully. When he spoke, his voice was honest and direct. "Because I know what it is like to be alone," he said. "Because everyone deserves a place to grieve in safety. Because it is the right thing to do." He paused, looking out over the devastated valley. "And because I will ask no questions about your past, make no demands on your future. You can stay as long as you need, leave whenever you choose. No obligations except to help around the ranch if you are able." The girl studied him for another long moment, then slowly stood up from the boulder. She was taller than he had expected, with the graceful carriage of her people, but she moved like someone much older, weighted down by loss and exhaustion. "My name is Ayana," she said quietly. "It means eternal blossom." "Marcus Kane," he replied, extending his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. Her grip was firm, despite her obvious exhaustion. "Come on," Marcus said, leading his horse toward the muddy slope that led up to his ranch. "Let us get you somewhere warm and dry." The walk back to the ranch house took nearly an hour, with Marcus leading his horse and Ayana walking silently beside him. She moved with the quiet grace of her people, her feet finding sure footing even in the treacherous mud. But Marcus could see the exhaustion in her posture, the way she had to force herself to keep moving. The ranch house was modest but well built, constructed of adobe and timber with a red tile roof that Sarah had insisted upon. It had 3 rooms besides the kitchen, more space than Marcus needed for himself, but perfect for a family that had never come to be. Marcus led Ayana to the guest room, a small but comfortable space with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the valley. He had kept it ready for visitors who rarely came, changing the linens periodically more out of habit than necessity. "There are clean clothes in the chest," he said, indicating a wooden trunk at the foot of the bed. "They were my wife's. She was about your size." Ayana looked at him with surprise. "Your wife?" "She died 3 years ago," Marcus said simply. "Consumption. The clothes have just been sitting there since then. She would have wanted them to be useful to someone who needed them." Marcus left Ayana to rest and clean up while he went to the kitchen to prepare a meal. He was not much of a cook, but he could manage simple fare, and he suspected she had not eaten properly in days. As he worked, he could hear water being poured in the guest room, the soft sounds of someone washing away the mud and trauma of the past few days. When Ayana emerged an hour later, she was transformed. Sarah's blue cotton dress fit her well, and her long hair was clean and braided neatly down her back. She had washed the mud from her face, revealing high cheekbones and a strong jaw that spoke of both beauty and character. But her eyes still held that terrible emptiness, the look of someone who had survived when others had not. "Sit," Marcus said, indicating a chair at the small wooden table. "You need to eat." He served her a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee, the kind of fare that sustained a working ranch. Ayana ate slowly but steadily, and Marcus was relieved to see some color return to her cheeks as the warm food took effect. They ate in comfortable silence, the rain drumming gently on the roof overhead. Marcus did not press her with questions or attempts at conversation, understanding that words were not what she needed right now. What she needed was safety, warmth, and time to begin processing what had happened to her. After the meal, Marcus showed her around the small ranch, explaining the layout and the daily routines that kept the place running. He had 40 head of cattle, a small herd of horses, some chickens, and a few pigs. It was enough to provide a modest living for a man alone, but it required constant work. "I usually start before dawn," he explained as they walked through the barn. The animals need feeding and watering, and there is always something that needs fixing or building or mending. Ayana listened attentively, her eyes taking in every detail of the operation. Marcus could see the intelligence behind her quiet demeanor, the way she absorbed information and understood how everything fit together. "If you decide to stay for a while," he continued, "you are welcome to help with whatever interests you. But there is no pressure. You can take as much time as you need to figure out what comes next." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red, Ayana finally began to talk about what had happened. "The water came so fast," she said, her voice distant with memory. "We had warnings, signs that the river was rising, but no one expected anything like this. The old ones said they had never seen such a flood." Marcus listened without interrupting, understanding that she needed to tell her story in her own way and her own time. "I was gathering wood on the hillside when I heard the roar," she continued. "By the time I reached the village, the water was already there. I saw my grandmother's lodge swept away with her still inside. I saw children caught in the current, too far away for anyone to help." Her voice broke slightly, and Marcus saw her hands clench into fists in her lap. "I tried to help," she whispered. "I went into the water, tried to reach my little cousin, but the current was too strong. It carried me downstream, and when I finally managed to get to shore, everything was gone. Everyone was gone." Marcus reached out slowly and placed his hand over hers, offering what comfort he could through simple human contact. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "No one should have to endure such loss." Ayana looked at him with tears glistening in her eyes. "Why did I survive when they did not? Why was I the only one left?" It was a question Marcus had asked himself many times after Sarah's death, a question that had no satisfying answer. "I do not know," he said honestly, "but I do know that your survival means something. Maybe you are meant to carry their memory forward. Maybe you are meant to build something new from what was lost." The weeks that followed established a routine that felt surprisingly natural to both of them. Marcus continued his ranch work, and Ayana gradually began to help with various tasks around the property. She had a natural way with animals, and the horses in particular seemed to respond to her gentle presence. She also proved to be skilled at practical tasks, mending clothes with neat stitches, tending the vegetable garden with knowledge inherited from generations of desert dwellers, and cooking meals that were far more flavorful than Marcus's simple fare. They worked together during the day and sat together in the evenings, sometimes talking, sometimes simply sharing comfortable silence. Marcus told her about his life before the ranch, his years as a soldier in the Civil War, his marriage to Sarah, and their dreams of raising a family in this beautiful but harsh land. Ayana shared memories of her people, their customs and stories, the rich culture that had been swept away by the flood. As autumn deepened into winter, Marcus began to realize that he was happier than he had been since Sarah's death. The ranch felt alive again, filled with purpose and companionship that he had not realized he was missing. Ayana's presence brought a warmth to the place that had nothing to do with the fires they built against the desert cold. One evening in November, as they sat by the fireplace working on their respective tasks, Marcus repairing a broken harness, Ayana weaving a basket from willow reeds she had gathered by the stream, she looked up at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Marcus," she said quietly, "may I ask you something?" "Of course," he replied, setting aside his work to give her his full attention. "When you found me by the river, you said you would ask no questions about my past, make no demands on my future. Do you still mean that?" Marcus nodded. "Absolutely. Your choices are your own to make." Ayana was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire as if seeking guidance in the dancing flames. "My people have a tradition," she said finally. "When someone loses their family, their clan, they can choose to be adopted by another family, to become part of a new tribe. It is not common, but it is accepted when circumstances are unusual." Marcus felt his heart begin to beat faster, sensing the direction of her thoughts, but not wanting to assume too much. "I have been thinking," Ayana continued, "about what it means to build something new from what was lost, about what my grandmother would want for me, what my people would want for me." She looked up at him directly, her dark eyes serious but no longer empty. I think they would want me to choose life over death, hope over despair. They would want me to find a new family, a new purpose, a new way to honor their memory. Marcus set down his tools completely, giving her his full attention. What are you saying, Ayanna? I am saying that I would like to stay, she said simply. Not as a guest, not as someone passing through, but as someone who belongs here, as family. Marcus felt emotion well up in his chest, a mixture of joy and relief, and something deeper that he had not felt since Sarah's death. Are you certain? He asked. This life, this place, it is not easy. The winters are cold, the summers are brutal, and we are far from other people. It can be a lonely existence. Ayanna smiled, and for the first time since he had found her, the expression reached her eyes. I have known true loneliness, she said. Sitting on that rock, believing I was the last of my people, that was loneliness. This is not loneliness. This is home. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch that had become his world. When he turned back to Ayanna, his voice was thick with emotion. Then stay, he said. Stay as long as you want. This is your home now, for as long as you choose to make it so. The spring after Ayanna chose to stay brought changes to the ranch that surprised them both. She had spent the winter learning not just the practical aspects of ranch life, but absorbing the rhythms and patterns that made the operation successful. Her suggestions for improvements came from a different perspective, one shaped by generations of desert survival and sustainable living. She taught Marcus about plants he had never noticed, desert foods that could supplement their diet and medicines that could treat common ailments. She showed him techniques for water conservation that her people had developed over centuries, methods for reading weather patterns that proved remarkably accurate. In return, Marcus shared his knowledge of cattle ranching, horse training, and the business aspects of running a successful operation. He taught her to read and write English, skills that would be valuable in dealing with suppliers and buyers. Together, they began to plan improvements and expansions that would make the ranch more productive and more sustainable. Their neighbors, the few ranchers scattered across the vast territory, initially viewed Ayanna's presence with suspicion and disapproval. A white man living with an Apache woman was unusual enough to generate gossip and concern. But as months passed, and it became clear that the arrangement was working well for both parties, most came to accept the situation. There were exceptions, of course. Jacob Morrison, who owned the nearest ranch 15 miles to the east, made it clear that he disapproved of Marcus's choice to harbor what he called a savage. Other settlers expressed concern about the precedent it might set, the possibility that other Indians might expect similar treatment. Marcus dealt with these concerns directly but diplomatically, making it clear that Ayanna was under his protection and that anyone who had a problem with her presence was welcome to avoid his ranch entirely. His reputation as a fair dealer and a man of his word carried weight in the territory, and most people chose to respect his decision even if they did not understand it. The real test came in late spring when a group of Apache warriors appeared on the horizon, approaching the ranch under a flag of truce. Marcus saw them first, noting their careful approach and the way they stopped at a respectful distance from the house. Ayanna, he called, keeping his voice calm. You might want to see this. She emerged from the house and immediately recognized the lead rider, her face lighting up with a joy Marcus had never seen before. Cloudwalker, she breathed, then ran toward the group of warriors with tears streaming down her face. Marcus watched as she was embraced by the lead warrior, an older man with gray in his hair and the bearing of a chief. They spoke rapidly in Apache, their voices carrying across the distance, but their words indecipherable to Marcus. After several minutes of animated conversation, Ayanna led the group toward the house. Marcus stepped forward to meet them, his hand resting casually on his gun belt but his posture non-threatening. Marcus, Ayanna said, her voice bright with happiness, this is Cloudwalker, my mother's brother. He survived the flood because he was hunting in the mountains when it came. These are warriors from his band. Cloudwalker studied Marcus with intelligent eyes, taking in everything from his weathered clothing to the way he stood protectively near Ayanna. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear. My niece tells me you saved her life, he said simply, that you gave her shelter when she had nothing, asked for nothing in return. Anyone would have done the same, Marcus replied, though he knew that was not necessarily true. No, Cloudwalker said firmly. Not anyone. You are a good man, Marcus Kane. My sister's daughter is precious to me, the last of her family line. That you have cared for her as if she were your own daughter honors both you and her. Marcus felt Ayana's eyes on him and saw something in her expression that he could not quite identify. She has become family to me, Marcus said honestly. This is her home now, for as long as she chooses. Cloudwalker nodded approvingly. She tells me she wishes to stay, that she has found peace here. This is good. But I want her to know that she also has a place with my band, that she will always be welcome among her father's people. The warriors stayed for 2 days, during which time Marcus learned more about Apache culture and customs than he had ever known. He was impressed by their knowledge of the land, their sophisticated understanding of desert survival, and their complex social structures. When they prepared to leave, Cloudwalker pulled Marcus aside for a private conversation. My niece is a woman now, he said carefully. Among our people she would have been married by now, would have children of her own. She tells me she is content here, but I wonder if she is truly happy, or if she is simply grateful. Marcus considered the question seriously. Over the months they had lived together, his feelings for Ayana had grown beyond simple protectiveness or companionship. He had come to care for her deeply, to value not just her help around the ranch, but her presence in his life. But he had never allowed himself to consider the possibility of anything more than the family-like relationship they had established. I care for her deeply, Marcus said finally, but I have never wanted to take advantage of her gratitude or her circumstances. She came here as someone who had lost everything. I wanted her to have time to heal, to choose her own path without pressure from me. Cloudwalker smiled. You are wise to be cautious. But perhaps it is time to consider that she has healed, that she has chosen her path. Perhaps it is time to ask her what she truly wants for her future. That evening, after the Apache warriors had departed, Marcus and Ayana sat on the porch as they had so many evenings before. But this time, the air between them felt different, charged with unspoken possibilities. Cloudwalker seemed to approve of our arrangement, Marcus said carefully. He does, Ayana replied. He says you are a man of honor, that I am fortunate to have found such a protector. Is that how you see me? Marcus asked. As a protector? Ayana was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. At first, yes, she said slowly. You were the man who saved me from despair, who gave me shelter when I had nowhere else to go. But over these months, you have become much more than that. She turned to face him, her dark eyes serious and direct. You have become the person I most want to spend my days with, the person whose happiness matters as much to me as my own. You have become, she paused, searching for the right words, the person I choose to love. Marcus felt his breath catch. In all the scenarios he had imagined, he had never dared to hope that she might feel the same growing attachment that he had been fighting to suppress. Ayana, he said softly, are you certain? You have been through so much loss, so much change. I do not want you to confuse gratitude with something deeper. She smiled, and in that smile, Marcus saw not the broken girl he had found by the river, but a strong woman who knew her own heart. I am certain, she said firmly. I have had months to understand the difference between gratitude and love. I am grateful to you for saving my life. But I love you for the man you are, for your kindness, your strength, your willingness to see past the differences between our peoples to the person I am underneath. Marcus reached for her hand, marveling at how perfectly it fit in his own. I love you too, he said simply. I have for months, but I was afraid to say it, afraid it would change things between us. Everything has already changed, Ayana said softly. The question is whether we have the courage to embrace that change. They were married in June, in a ceremony that blended elements of both their traditions. Cloudwalker returned to give the Apache blessing, while the circuit preacher provided Christian vows. Most of their neighbors attended, their initial skepticism having given way to acceptance of a union that clearly brought happiness to both parties. As autumn returned to the high desert, Marcus and Ayana stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Ayana's hand rested on her growing belly, where their first child grew beneath her heart. "Do you ever regret staying?" Marcus asked, as he sometimes did on quiet evenings when the immensity of the changes in their lives seemed almost overwhelming. "Never," Ayana replied without hesitation. "The flood took everything I had known, but it also brought me to you. Sometimes I think the spirits knew what they were doing when they washed me downstream to your ranch." Marcus pulled her closer, marveling at the way their lives had intertwined from that first moment of desperate need and simple human kindness. "I used to think this land was too harsh for happiness," he said. "But you have shown me that love can bloom anywhere, even in the aftermath of devastation." Ayana smiled, her hand covering his where it rested on her belly. "My grandmother used to say that the strongest flowers are the ones that grow in difficult soil," she said. "They have deeper roots, more resilient stems. I think our love is like that, made stronger by what we have both survived." As the stars appeared overhead and the desert settled into its evening quiet, they remained on the porch, two survivors who had found in each other not just companionship, but a love that transcended the circumstances of its beginning. The Apache girl, who had been the only one left after the flood, was no longer alone, no longer defined by loss. She had become Ayana Kane, wife and soon-to-be mother, a woman who had built a new life from the wreckage of the old. And the lonely rancher who had asked her to stay, no questions asked, had discovered that sometimes the most profound answers come not from questions we ask, but from the generosity we show to those who need it most. In the high desert of Arizona territory, where survival required both strength and adaptability, they had created something beautiful together, a home built on mutual respect, a love grown from understanding, and a future bright with possibility.